She and I spent 5 weeks together in a sort of academic boot camp, the first ever national endowment any of us in some way, integrated feedback using that we can leverage to create real-world evidence to empower self-using obfuscate theoretical jargon, asking us to describe ideas and expression. Oftentimes, we could to enable challenges with the spirit of generosity. And through these interactions, I learned to articulate my theoretical ideas clearly, and rather than a real-world evidence would make them more accessible to the rest disciplines, which is what I learned in disability studies. So I really appreciated that. Study is also firmly committed to inclusion. At this seminar, many of us needed different disability accommodations, and we learned that some of our accommodations actually created barriers for other people. This is what we call competing accommodations. So one person's accommodation actually makes another person's situation worse. And this is a huge issue. And I remember seeing this incredibly something that model how to take responsibility for making this the most of a seemingly uncomfortable situation without leaving anyone in the dust and bending from yourself. So we never made it perfect, but it wasn't like, we'll forget you if it's too complicated. So Sandy is insistent on clarity, rigor, grounding theory with evidence, and inclusion. Because for people must match your work's great significance to the marginalized communities whose history she writes. Her research on disability history is largely uncharted territory, and critically important to our community's understanding of the roots of disability oppression, which provides vital information for creating the kind of futures we imagine and fight for. Until recently, the academy has largely dismissed disabled people as generators of knowledge, but instead only its objects. Sandy's work is an active corrective thing. So without further ado, my friend and colleague, Dr. Sufian. Thanks so much for that introduction. Today we're going to talk to you about risk, lack of acceptance, and adoption. 1955, so not too late. But before I do that, I wanted to thank Sue and for giving me this opportunity to be at this year this year, and to the department chairs and to department chairs for allowing me to take this opportunity. And then to the Institute fellows for exposing me to a bunch of very interesting topics and scholarly approaches, and for always engaging in intellectual, vigorous discussion and point, which is very nice. For teaching So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the research that I've been doing this past year as the Institute Fellow. But I wanted to first give you a very brief overview of my book project, for which this research was extracted. After that, I'm going to highlight findings from one of my chapters about what I call the adoption overcoming narrative. And I want to point out that sometimes I'm going to be using terms like handicapped or mentally retarded that are not particularly acceptable in today's audience. But I'm using them as a reflection of the sources that I'll be quoting or referring to. So I myself am not endorsing this page. Right? So here's the dates of my so the book manuscript is entitled Familial Fitness, Risk, Disability, and Adoption in America, 1920 to 1990. And one of the things that I want to share this document here. The project seeks to examine the mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion of disability and difference in the 20th century American family. I'm interested in questions of kinship and disability, particularly how notions and practices of the family have historically accommodated or haven't accommodated disability, and how the language of risk is implicated in that complicated relationship. I ask the specific questions: are children with disabilities unworthy of family, why or why not? And I deliberately use the term worthy because such notions and practices are a reflection of which children are valued and which children are not. I ask these questions by investigating the case of American adoption. As it's a site where families are deliberately made, so the relationship between kinship and disability gets purposefully and explicitly measured and made. So what's at stake in this project for one injury? And for me, it's not only about a better understanding of how disability operates in an intimate setting, which has significant cultural and social import, but the project also evokes for me a very practical basic concern for children with disabilities to have a place in families and in society. So the argument of my book is that the historical trajectory of the adoption of children marked by disability in the 20th century can be characterized as the passage from widespread exclusion to partial inclusion, from assumed unworthiness in a pre or virtue era to conditional worthiness in the post-war and post-war era and beyond. I say marked by because between 1950 and around 1955, some could say 1948, in terms of disability, adoption professionals were mostly concerned with placement of children, well, they were concerned with placement of children who had what they deemed pathological family histories. And this usually meant the mother had mental illness or something disorders without levels or mental retardation, or the family had some history of coming out of either incest or other kind of treatments. And so the book deals with both children with and without diagnosed impairments. But immediately at different historical moments, evoked great concern regarding their candidacy for successful adoption. One of the central concepts that frames the historical trajectory that I chart is the idea of risk. Indeed, the problem of what is called adoptability in adoption jargon, which means whether or not a child is eligible for adoption, is wrapped up in the language of risk. Changing ideas about risk back onto the story, reflecting larger cultural ideas about who belongs in a family and what kind of families are acceptable. Two main scholarly interventions that I'd like to make in this project. Briefly put, the first one is that I want to contribute an analysis of disability to adoption history. Adoption stories have looked at issues of race, secrecy, and the problem of the privacy of the biological family, but there is no systematic study on the question of disability. There is some new work out on disability and adoption by literary scholars, and historians have not really taken up this charge. Two, I'd also like to contribute a study of adoption to the field of disability history. When it comes to histories of or about disability in children, we have histories of special education, of children with mental retardation, and institutionalization, and sterilization, but we don't have much about child welfare in the family. So what I'm trying to do in my work is to draw from the insights of adoption on disability history as well as other histories like the history of family, to inform the topic as well as to work to intersect these two primary sets of scholarship. So this is the chapter outline of my book. I can stand right now. And I highlight material from chapter 3 today in my talk for the rest of the talk. And that chapter is called Introduction to Disability Area, Replacing Fears of Risk with Love and Acceptance, 1955 to 1980, Centering Practice History, from the Institute of Physics, for the workshop institute. So you're going to get the introduction books. Maybe can you guys read this long? You all read it to you, okay? The child with mental retardation was warehoused in a state institution, and a child with a medical problem or physical disability ended up at the local hospital for sick children, not to be eventually catch-all in foster care. The children were labeled good candidates for therapy, rehabilitation, or diagnostic evaluation, but never adoption. What they needed was love. Craddock's emphasis upon a child's need for love reflected a term starting in the mid to late 1950s to rethink and push for the adoption of children with diagnosed impairments. In adoption discussions, love and acceptance have therapeutic value, not only for children with disabilities, but for all marginalized children. And marginalized children here, I mean, they're sort of listed this way as source of minority, mixed race, older, and handicapped children. Love and acceptance offer a cure for children commonly excluded or overlooked from adoption, and that were deprived of family by offering permanency and security. But in relation to what was called handicapped children, I want to suggest that a focus on love and acceptance in the 1950s, mid-1950s through about 1980, signaled a reconfiguration in the adoption discourse about risk, from having a child embody the risk of disability to the idea of risk residing in prejudice and social barriers to placement. Adoption leaders' criticism of previous and existing agency practices alongside new standards began to rectify exclusionary placement practices. As part of this process, adoption leaders appealed to social workers to invite potential parents to accept disabled children into their family by overcoming their fears of risk related to disability, usually regarding the child's future, his or her not being able to comply in one's family, or about medical expenses, and replacing those fears on love and acceptance. In essence, I argue they deployed an overcoming narrative that was traditionally applied to disabled people themselves. The adoption parent overcoming narrative was consistent with and part of a broader shift in adoption practice from trying to solve the needs of parent childlessness to addressing the need of the child to have a stable family, which was seen as a precondition to healthy development. It involved two basic but interrelated stages. The first being a decision-making moment where parents overcame fears in order to adopt children with disabilities. The second stage entailed the practice of overcame by mobilizing love and acceptance, both in the service of facilitating their child's attempts to overcome his or her disability, and also in the service of establishing strong emotional bonds expected of her family. The purported return for adoptive parents who overcame was the abundant rewards of family life. Although parents of non-adopted children with disabilities were also expected to push and inspire their children to overcome their disability through acts of love and dedication during this time, the adoption overcoming narrative can be set apart from the non-adopted case, not only in the distinction that parents here were asked to overcome, but also that request required a conscious act of choosing a child with a disability and then actively achieving belonging as a family unit. This belonging was not assumed, as in the biological case, but had to be created through love and acceptance. There is evidence that parents who adopted children with disabilities also employed the language of love and acceptance, even as many challenged the agency obstacles that stood in their way. And I can't detail this part of the story due to time limitation, but suffice it to say that their narration of love and acceptance was more nuanced than their professional discussions, as they detailed the emotional work involved in raising a child with a disability, describing it as a process entailing rewards and struggles, dedication, ambivalence, and doubt, rather than a call to action or an inspirational story of success. Before I discuss the adoption overcoming narrative, it's important to first describe trope overcoming commonly applied to people with disabilities. This is sort of a typical picture of overcoming. The overcoming narrative is stable in discussions about disability because of its ability to uphold the ideals of hope, courage, parents and independence occurred in American national mythology. In mid to late 20th century America, rehabilitation to medical and special education professionals used overcoming, they still kind of do, and as a central approach that focused on having their clients achieve functional independence and try to be productive citizens. Far from being grounded in scientific understanding of maximizing health, this narrative grew out of a cultural belief that working hard, not despite any obstacle, ultimately lead to success, and that dependency resulted from moral and psychological failure. From cultural narratives that stress FDR's triumph over disease and disability, to the inspirational stories of children with various disabilities and telephone, the overcoming narrative music that in order to rehabilitate the presumed spoiled identities of people with disabilities, the latter had to overcome their limitations, avoid self-pity, and be constantly cheerful, be brave, cope, and strive well as inspire the non-disabled in order to escape their own social morbidity. Overcoming fell short of complete validity imparted by medical culture, but it granted overcomers partial social acceptance even as it lasted for mixed and complicated feelings of both the disabled and non-disabled in the process. The adoption of overcoming narrative maintained many of these features, although it was also closely tied to wider trends in adoption practice during this period. One of those trends has to do with changes in child eligibility and is related to the question to which children should parental overcoming efforts be applied. Okay. Sorry, it just computer number PowerPoint, so when they first transfer their breaks, the adult overcoming narrative developed alongside a reappraisal of the concept of adoptability that took place in 1958. At that time in child welfare legal America, the umbrella organization of all adoption agencies in the U.S., broadened its definition of adoptability, recommending in its new standards that adoption be considered for, quote, any child who is deprived of care by his natural parents, who is or can be made legally free for adoption, and who has the capacity here is important, to form a relationship with new parents and develop here is important in a family. So capacity and development are the two things that we will see sort of get applied very quickly for children here. The standards also stated, quote, there are no hereditary factors that should automatically rule out adoption. And this is a reference to the pathological family histories that I talked about at the beginning. So in 1958, the Child Welfare League of America sort of explicitly says you cannot rule out kids because of any hereditary factors. Right? So the league provides these standards for already adopted in League's 1955 National Conference that stated that to be adopted, a child must be able to quote-unquote benefit from normal family life, and that a family must have been found that would, quote, accept him and his history and capacities. The 1958 standards reflected what the League's director, Joseph Reed, stated was the ability of the adoption field to recognize both the strength, the courage, and the fiber of families in America to accept what comes, and also to be really accepting of less than perfect children. In essence, we have recognized the power of love. But the exact interpretation of the League standard and its means for the placement of children with disabilities held no consensus amongst agency workers well into the 1960s and even later. Its implementation was skewed. Given the recognition of the inability to accurately predict the mental or physical development of an infant, which was amazing. So psychologists finally realized, psychiatrists finally realizing that action tests have no predictability for kids under 2. Okay, so with that, children with what were called pathological family histories could being previously excluded but were now considered adoptable Upon deeper interrogation, one finds that adoptability was differentially applied according to the degree and correctability of a child's impairment. That being said, a rethinking of adoptability caused larger societal challenges to the traditional concept of the family in the late 1950s through the 1970s, and was also a function of the adoption market. Those challenges resulted in a new concept of family, defined by a child welfare and others as a unit based on ties of affection and the actual performance of the child during growth, and not just one based on biological ties or blood. Given these emerging ideas, adoption increasingly became accepted as a legitimate form of family. Whereas in 1958, for instance, there were 96,000 adoptions. By 1970, the number had risen to 175,000. Yet fewer healthy infants of children used in adoption parlance were being put up for adoption as compared to demand, particularly through agencies. This left many agencies looking to other marginalized children previously excluded from adoption to fulfill applicants' desires for a child. This quote is not worth them. As Valerie Elkin, Associate Director of the Foster Care Project at the Child Welfare League of America, remarked in 1959, the so-called market for older and handicapped children, to say nothing of children of minority races or mixed racial backgrounds, is exactly the reverse of the market for infants. There are never enough applicants for the children who have somewhat special needs, so that more effort must go into finding these parents. We also found that adoptive parents are willing to take certain so-called risks and will assume responsibility for children who are handicapped or who are above the age of infancy. As we focus on the needs of the child and not on what we believe are the needs of the adoptive parents, our conviction grows that these children are not seconds. Reflecting on the cultural value of children with disabilities and other marginalized children, helping critique the prejudices of agency workers and physicians, questioning whether what others deemed the risks of older children or children with handicaps in adoption were in fact real or imagined. It all depended, she suggested, upon a family's perspective. Felton's remarks reflected an emerging liberalization of the idea of risk from a dichotomous concept where a child is either risky or not, to a continuous one, that is, where risk is contingent upon parents' perceptions. Yet adoption statistics show that most families believe these risks still necessitated avoidance, and that such children were considered much less desirable. 5 years after Felton's statement, for instance, a similar market remained. There were, say, 7 applicants to every 1 white girl in Britain. The opposite was true for marginalized children. There was 1 applicant for every 7 what was called hard-to-place children. Such conditions in the adoption market led to concerted efforts to increase the number of interracial placements, especially in relation to Native American and African American children, and to defer the beginnings of intercountry adoption. Another influence on the expansion of adoptability was larger currents of civil rights activism that compelled adoption leaders in this period to rethink, in the words of adoption historian Ellen Cumming, how much of a, quote, difference actually made when it came to building and sustaining families. As opposed to the expressed mission of creating the closest estimation of a biological family in years past, by the mid-1960s and later, adoption professionals began to more readily acknowledge difference as a fundamental element of adoptive families. Strong efforts in child advocacy and a permanency claim movement accompanied these changes, with advocates emphasizing the autonomy and rights of the child and the importance of a permanent family. The growing problem of marginalized children sustained stay in foster care forced a reevaluation of casework practices in order to move children out of that system and into permanent care. For some agencies, if your child is disabled or not disabled, they belong. There's no question about that. But
well,
this is...
isn't there a trend, at least sometime in the early post-war era, of taking disabled children and just kind of shipping them out?
Yes.
Right?
And that's even before that.
And before as well.
Right.
So that belonging is kind of in question, isn't it?
Well, I think maybe you can help with this, but I don't think the belonging is in question. I think it's what to do with these kids, like how to handle them, right? And so that is the prescription. I mean, that's where most kids go.
There's a discussion of who is best fit to raise these children, and the argument is that parents, at least in the era I looked at, the 10s and 20s, the parent is not the person who can best care for a child with a disability. You need to send your child to experts. So that act of love becomes sending that child out. I mean, obviously, there are probably some families who are like, no, just get rid. But the act of love becomes getting rid of this child, as opposed to the rehabilitation within the family. The rehabilitation is external.
Well, yes, this is a rehabilitative project within the family. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I still can't help but see it as a kind of exaggeration of all of these voluntarist trends that are going on with the family generally, and all of the fears around, like everything from, there's the appearance of birth control, and, Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, any number of things, this anxiety and focus on family as a voluntary endeavor, which adoption really kind of highlights.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the things that I find so interesting about studying adoption, right, which is the beginning issue, that it really puts into relief these questions about the making of family. What is a family? What's not a family, right? Because it is made, literally. This woman, Ellen Gurney, wrote this fantastic adoption history called Kinship by Design. So, and that is exactly what it is. And before, which I didn't get a chance to explain, and this might help, before this period, and even in the early part of this period, there's what's called matching. And so you would come to an agency, a parent would come to an agency, and the agency worker would say, okay, you have blue eyes, you're light skinned, you have gray hair, you have glasses, whatever, you're 5, however, whatever.
Professor.
You're a professor, you're highly educated. We have to find a child that's like you, because you don't want your child to know that he or she is adopted, right? So there's a bunch of secrecy. Okay? Now, in the 60s into the 70s, this whole secrecy thing gets challenged. And David Kirk, this sort of famous sociologist, writes this book called The Shared Fate. And he argues that we have to start realizing that these kids actually have emotional or psychological disability coming
but then of course that can reintroduce matching as you make clear in your presentation.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not matching in the traditional sense, but until this time, they are strict matching requirements almost. I mean, it's across the board that that's how adoption is working. Okay.
So in the later period of this time frame, I'm wondering if there was a difference when the birth parents, usually the mother, was allowed to be the one to choose. So
Not during this period at all.
So even in the 90s?
No, not, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This
period stops in 1980.
Oh,
This
okay.
chapter stops in
So I'm
1980.
asking for a later chapter now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the birth parent starts to be able to choose, which honestly, I haven't moved beyond like 1985 in my sources, so I'm not sure when it really happens. The whole adoption thing starts to, it changes completely.
Well, just
Because then adoption, social workers have way less authority over things.
and then also you get counsel as an adoptive parent with a disability, counsel that, and a white person, that white birth mothers wouldn't choose me because I had a disability, so we were steered towards special needs adoption because those children were in such demand and there were so many white people lined up to adopt them that we'd never get chosen, so you may as well shift to the special needs.
Correct, but that is going on in this period. They wouldn't say it in terms of the birth parent would never choose you, but it's the market issue.
Yeah.
That there's so many people who want white healthy infants that you with a disability would be steered towards the special needs child. Almost automatically, because you have a marginalizing characteristic.
I thought it was interesting how they blame it on the birth mother, that they would never.
Oh.
The first
Yeah.
birth mother from the first child we adopted, I asked her why she chose our file, and she said it was because I was a professor, and I didn't hide the disability, because then that was also the other case, and the acceptability of the parents, or how the parents had to present themselves, so that you hide certain characteristics, and she didn't even mention my disability at all. No, that wasn't even a consideration, so I think it's interesting what the social workers are assuming
Yes.
that a child needs, or a parent, maybe they didn't even consider the birth mother's
No.
desires at all.
No. The birth mother has very little to do with this adoption almost nothing to do with the adoption overcoming narrative. They're largely absent. So once the child is placed and accepted as placement, even into foster care, the agency takes over the care of the child. So then the birth mother can go do their thing. Right. That's this period.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the concept of risk, and
Yeah.
and this might be discussed more in a different chapter, but does the literature ever specify what the parents are risking? What is the risk? Or is it just implied that they're risking, by taking on a disabled child, they're risking a child that's going to be forever dependent on them, or what is the risk?
Yeah. So I had to come up with what they were thinking, because they don't ever really say. But what they think is the risk of an unsuccessful adoption. So when they're saying they're risky for what's called a disrupted adoption, which means that the adoptive parents will give the child back. But it's almost always about disability. So even if they're talking about the risk of, let's say, an African American child, it inevitably gets sort of framed around, well, they might have emotional problems, and so because they've been in long-term foster care, and so the emotional disability is the one that causes them to be disrupted.
So then the risk is not, I guess I was understanding it as the parents were taking the risk of adopting a child with whatever characteristics. But it's actually the risk of the agency or both.
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. I mean, the agency does not want the child to be returned.
Right.
Definitely.
because they feel that their whole mission is to create successful families. That is their mission. That's a professional, that's what they're trained to do. If they're trained, by the way, not all of them were trained during this period. But it's almost always in terms of disability. And so I was trying to sort of come up with, well, what exactly is it? It's a fear of the child being dependent or what kind of future are they going to have? Or how the very expensive medical expenses. So what happened during this period is that if you were a foster parent, you were paid a board payment for taking care of this child every month, let's say. It wasn't a lot. It's still not a lot. But your child could also, a foster child could also be eligible in 65 for Medicaid to pay for medical expenses. And so, but once they were adopted, they were no longer on the Medicaid rolls. So there was no incentive to take these kids out of foster care if they had disabilities, because then the parents would have to figure out how to provide for their medical expenses, unless you were wealthy. And as you see, the wealthy parents didn't want them. So there's this conundrum that happens. And then in 70, I think it's 78, I have to go back. It's either 78 or 80, which is kind of late. There's a law, a federal law that says, no, you can continue your Medicaid. So that takes away that disincentive. But the risk is, these are hopeless risks. But what they mean is disability is the risk. And whatever all of that entails. Now what happens is that there are all these studies in the 70s about adoption disruption. And almost all of them show that children with disabilities actually there's not a lot of disruption. There's actually more disruption in sort of biological families. So once that science gets out, then they sort of the agencies take a deep breath and say, okay, we're feeling a little better about this. But there's a lot of angst throughout the 20th century, most of the 20th century, about disruption. Yeah.
I'm just curious about the relations between the adopted parents and the biological parents and the children in both in the general sense in terms of the adoption and also for disabled children in particular. Because I'm thinking, if we think about the formation of family identity, the feeling of belonging or love. So I'm actually wondering this kind of tricky triangle relations between the three sets of actors. So yes, so how that play out? Because I didn't hear you mention that.
This is called the adoption triad in adoption triad. So it's the birth mother. It's usually the mother. In the 70s, the adoptive father starts to gain legal rights, but before that, they have no legal rights.
The adoptive father, or
I'm sorry, the biological father. Sorry, thank you for that. And then the child and the adoptive parents, and the agency is like this fourth wheel, but it's always there. So, during this time, because of the stigma of illegitimacy, which then sort of fades in the 70s, starts to fade in the 70s and into the 80s, there's the sense, at least for white birth mothers, to protect them, to protect their, actually, Wayne Karp has written this great book, he's an adoption historian, about how the secrecy, the closed records in adoption was actually promoted, or the idea of birth mothers. The birth mothers wanted closed records because they didn't want the children to be able to find them. We don't think that now, right? But that was actually historically the case. So it was a way for agencies to protect the will and the wishes of the birth mothers. So once the birth mother places the child, first of all, in casework, because of the special needs, the agency workers start to take these very detailed medical histories of the mothers. And if they can get the fathers, but way more than even the pre-war period, which is kind of strange given the eugenic context of the pre-war period. But so casework changes to really like have 2 or 3 interviews about the medical history. I don't know if I'm answering this question yet, but but because of the stigma of illegitimacy, and Ricky Solinger has written about sort of white illegitimacy during this period, as adoption, it's called the adoption mandate. She says it's a way to sort of get rid of your wrongdoing, and then go live your life, right? For African American birth mothers, it's different. They are expected to keep their children. The ones that don't, and there are some that don't, that want to place their children. There's this whole assumption that illegitimacy in the African American community is not stigmatized as much. And there's a whole public debate about this. So there's not this sort of like, place them and then go live your life. On the other hand, that is the casework practice. So that is effectively what happens to the mothers that place their children. And then there's foster care, which is a whole other major problem during this period. And foster care is, parents place their children involuntarily and voluntarily. So they place them involuntarily because of neglect and abuse, and voluntarily because they're a widow and they can't take care of their child. There's poverty in the family. There's one of the parents gets ill themselves. There's a whole variety of reasons why parents are placing their children in foster care. But once that child is placed into what's called the custodial care of the agency takes care of them. So the agency would then place them into a foster care situation, hoping to find a family for them. And until they do, they're in foster care from home to home to home. And this is called foster drift, for those children who cannot be placed. And foster drift occurs most for these marginalized children. And it produces, according to Moss and Engler, who wrote this sort of major book in '59, emotional disability, psychological disability. It has all these sort of productive qualities. Okay, then the adoptive parents. So the adoptive parents have contact with the agency. They do not have contact with the birth parents. So the birth parents have contact with the agency, and the adoptive parents have contact with the agency. But they don't have contact with each other, right? It's really only until Bastard Nation, which is in the 1980s, when adoptees say, listen, we're not children, we're adults, and we want to know who our birth parents are, and we want these records to be opened. Then these families start coming together and meeting each other, but not during this period. So the adoptive parents come to the agency, to whatever agency, and apply, go through these very rigorous interviews, what's still called the home study, where you're interviewed quite rigorously. They come to your home, they see your house, and that was going on then too. And then you find out if you're eligible, and then then you would go to a group meeting, even during this period, still exists, where the agency workers sort of talk about what kids are available, and they would start to steer the parents they always had too many white parents wanting white healthy infants. So they would start to sort of ask or figure out which parents are the ones that would be most willing to adopt a special needs child, and offer it's always very particular. They don't just offer a child. They offer a particular child with a picture and a description to try to create this sort of attachment so that they can overcome their fear. Okay? I don't know if that
Yeah,
answered your
well, if I
question.
can quickly follow up.
Yeah.
I guess my bigger question here is how this kind of identity or belonging, sense of belonging is formed, or what is the best way for the children to form this kind of sense of belonging? Because one can imagine if they are embedded as much as possible with the adoptive parents and the family, then they can feel that they are part of them. But I feel like there is the emerging culture that the adoptive parents let their children to discover their original roots, even in really early periods of time. Maybe I'm thinking about international adoption in general, because I'm sure you know a lot about that. Like for example, some of the American parents, they would take their adopted children to their original country, like for example back to China when the children was really young, and to show them where they are from, and of course they can already hide because they look totally different. They are
Correct.
Yes, because but so I guess I'm just wondering, is this really a new culture in adoption in terms of letting the children know their roots as early as possible, so that they can feel, mentally health in terms of really not to hide it, but to know who they are, where they are from,
Yes.
and to be really open-minded about their own personal situation.
It occurs in this period with this David Kirk's Shared Fate book,
Right.
where he says, different. We have to start addressing difference. You can no longer be shrouded in this, it's called as if begotten ideology. It happens in this period. Now, some parents still try to hide it. That's a lot of reason why they want a white child.
Even if the child is disabled.
Even if I'm not sure about that, but I would suspect that's one of the, that would like ease them a little bit, because then, they can pass. There's a lot of passing going on in adoption. But it starts to come out. Now, there's a couple of memoirs. This woman, Betty Jean Lifton, writes this whole book about what's called genealogical bewilderment, and it's considered a psychological disorder of adoptees. And then there's this other woman named Jean Patent who creates an organization to promote, opening records and trying to find your birth parents. But it's early on in this. It's in the latter part of this period. This is the period that starts to open up to create new identities and be more open and to really accept the difference of adoptive families. And psychologists are starting to say, it's really better for your child. And there's these books, children's books that come out that still exist about how to tell your child that he's adopted, right? So this is the period. Okay,
Thanks.
sorry. Oh, sorry, Sue.
Oh, go ahead.
That's fine.
Well, my question is about the professionals. Because it seems to me that they have a huge amount of power in all of this,
Yeah.
and they're defining the terms. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the profession and what's changing in the profession in this period that might also be a factor in the changing definitions of risk and adaptability and things like that.
So the people that I'm calling the professionals are the adoption professionals are the ones like the thinkers, the ones who are writing, the ones who are leaders of organizations and or supervisors of agencies. The agency workers, the social workers, they are professionals, but that's not who I meant to say are the professionals here. I wanted to create a difference between them because it's very hard to get at what the workers are thinking and to themselves, or they're not writing as much. Plus, I should say that if I went and did an agency archive, if I went to the archives of an agency, there's hundreds of agencies. There's like 2,000 by 1980. So, but there are some historians that have done, like a history of the cradle, and I may be able to get to the agency workers on that level. But because I'm doing a history that's much broader and really based in these huge organizations that oversee, I was looking at the leaders and what I call the professionals, okay? So what's going on here is a lot of things. There's what's called the permanency planning movement, which I mentioned but I didn't describe. So the permanency planning movement is this attempt to address the growing crisis of foster care, and by promoting actually the promoting that children stay in their biological families. So there's this push for permanency first and foremost in a biological family. You try your best not to take families away, take kids away from their families. And so casework changes occur to create birth parent counseling that doesn't exist before, and then also post-placement for adoptive parents, post-placement counseling that also doesn't exist before. And this is all coming out of the social work profession. And then there's a whole, child advocacy movement in the late 50s and early 60s that also changed the discourse to the rights of the child. All of a sudden, the child has rights. So I don't know if I'm getting to the particulars of this, but those two things are what's going on sort of at the social work level of changes.
Is there a different group of people who are running the show in that sense, or theorizing about what should be done or what best practices are? I mean, is there a different group of people that come in to kind of shape the profession in this period than earlier, or is it a continuation?
It's a continuation. Yeah. And then you have a bunch of psychiatrists that are okay. So it's very complicated. So in the early 50s, some agencies who can afford it start to bring on psychiatrists, psychologists, geneticists, and anthropologists onto their staff to gain the insights from these people. So like if you had a kid with pathological family history of something, you would have them see the geneticist, even in the 50s, so that they could better assess the prospects of this child. You would also have psychiatrists who, in the early 50s, are mostly Freudian, to assess and figure out, like, what is the problem with the birth mother? What's the deep neurosis of the birth mother? By the 60s, that kind of goes away, but these thinkers they're the same thinkers. Yeah. And a lot of them are actually working in the agencies or have worked in the agencies and sort of run up the ladder. But the agency workers, many of them are not trained. They don't have masters of social work even. Only in the 70s do you start to see more and more social workers actually being trained in social work. So, but the leaders are trained in social work. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think my question echoes Sue's slightly, and it's about this kind of dynamic between, you started with the eugenics in the background,
Yeah.
and then there's a certain kind of romanticism about the overcoming,
Right.
and there's mythology around it, but there's a certain sense of freedom as to who decides or how we structure these kinds of relations.
Yeah.
But now I'm hearing that there is an appearance of the experts. And so how do you see this kind of, and where do you place the ultimate authority, if that's part of your project, about how a society like this one can actually manage such conflicting interests? Because from the point of the state, I suspect the way to control things is one way, and there's, where financial burdens and they all have to be addressed, from the points of the families and the agencies who are financially invested, and so on and so forth. What did you,
Yeah.
I mean, because I see both sides as, because I couldn't help but notice that when you were describing the overcoming narrative, you were displaying certain skepticism about it.
Yeah.
Right, okay. But so do you think the expertise of a master of social work or education, does that give us kind of a better grip on what's better for the child and family? Or are you ambivalent about this? And where do you
I think that? I'm not so sure that a master's of social worker imparts much to do about it.
Right. So,
Sorry, Lex.
but this seems to be what's happening in the discourse, right? Because these are the agenda-setting books, as it were, right?
Yes.
So, where do you see your own project with respect to this? And something like that.
I'm actually not, and maybe I need to more, and this is a very good question. No, it's a good question. Actually, Javier asked me this question too in some comment. I don't think I'm engaging enough with this professional issue. I think that and you know what, Jeff has also commented about this.
All right, I'm doing
Yeah, no, I need to have somewhere a section or something about the tensions between the leaders and these adoption workers. These adoption workers are not doing what the leaders want them to be doing, right? Not always. Sometimes they are. It's very hard to disentangle which ones are doing it and which aren't. But there are leaders who are writing about the frustrations that the agencies are not doing. Not all these agencies are doing what they want them to do. That these are standards, and that the implementation of these standards are up to the agencies. They're not happy with that. But that is, I mean, ultimately it is a casework practice. It's like what parent comes to you, which social worker you are, and which child happens to be on your list. During this time, there's casework overload, so there's not enough social workers to deal with the caseload. So kids are getting literally lost, their files are getting lost, which is another reason why they're staying in foster care for so long. There's just a whole range of issues going on, but ultimately it is a casework practice.
And there is no regulative set of...
The Child Welfare League of America is the regulatory body, but, you know, how do you regulate 2,000 agencies?
Well,
that are all
I mean,
over
I'm
the
sure
country?
there is a way to regulate it, but
No, actually, they say, you know, that these are standards. You know, they're recommendations, but we will not revoke your membership in this agency if you don't do it. So, and then there's exchanges that are set up during this period to list kids and parents who first, like in a local area, then in a regional, then in a state area, then in a regional area, to try to find the parents who are willing to accept this one child, and then they sort of put them together. And that's done at a higher level than the agency worker, but it is done by agencies. Ultimately, what ends up happening, and I talk about this in chapter 4, is that by 1978, children with disabilities are, in large part due to deinstitutionalization, but they're the longest waiting children on the lists of foster care. So there's an adoption project called the Developmental Disabilities Adoption Project that starts. It's a demonstration project for 2 years. Funded by the Child Welfare League of America, and they go around to 10 demonstration sites, find out what are the prejudices of the agency workers, and what do they need in terms of resources to place these children, how do we educate them about X, Y, or Z condition, and you know, how do we train them better to recruit parents. So there's a corrective, but it's only in 1978.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe one more question.
Oh, one more question? Okay.
LBJ and the Southern Democrats changed public housing, civilian public housing, from being a privilege, which was controlled by local people and given only to local people, known to the local housing boards, to a civil right. And I think that highly affected, you know, the babies available for adoption, because now mothers could, you know, go on HUD Section 8 and there was no stigma because the LBJ and Southern Democrats were amoral. They were, they federalized what had been local welfare, which not only put some of the local welfare offices out of business, they even put some of the local charities out of business because, people could apply to the feds and get more than they ever could from local charities. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that restricted those available from adoption because the mothers kept them because the feds gave them free housing on Section 8 along with food stamps and public education so the mothers could take care of their own children without having to go to work.
Well, okay, so this is the war on poverty stuff, right? Which it also affects and influences the adoption. And what I thought about when you raised that is that the connection with the AIDS to families of children, which is now called AIDS to families of dependent children, is an important sort of piece of this, which I don't totally understand. But there's changes to the AFC during this period. I mean, in the 80s, it's cut down. It's sort of bad. And it creates, more of a foster care crisis, in my opinion. I still have to sort of understand the dynamics of the AFC and adoption during this period and foster care because it's sort of a triangulation that's going on. So there are attempts to address poverty, which of course is directly related to the foster care crisis. By the way, there is not one. If you want a dissertation topic, there is not a history of foster care in this country. There is not one history. So everything about foster care that I had to learn, I had to learn on my own. Like go to the source. It's horrible. There was no secondary source. There are like 2 really good articles. That's it. So yes, there is a connection. I can't really. I don't feel comfortable giving you a detailed account of it because I'm not sure I totally understand it yet myself. It definitely affects though the trend towards either deciding to keep your child